I'm Jim Lancaster, James Lancaster. I'm a professor of higher education, human development, psychological counseling, college student development at Appalachian State University in Boone, North Carolina. And we're glad you're here this morning. I've been a conduct person, an administrative person for about 28 years, and then moved over to the dark side of being a full-time faculty member about 12 years ago. So I want to get a sense of who you all are, but first I want you to meet my colleague in crime here.
Good morning. They told me to get close to this, so. My name is Diane Warrield. Most people know me by Daisy. I'm an associate professor of human development and psychological counseling, but in college student development at Appalachian State University. I've had the good privilege of being very involved with the Association of Student Conduct Administration as a founder and a past president, and then was also involved with the Center for Academic Integrity as the executive director. So thank you for being here this morning. We're hoping that we would draw some people, but we weren't expecting so many, so thank you.
And since you're here, we'd like to know something about who you are. So could I just have a breakdown of how many of you are in student affairs of some sort work?
Yeah.
Okay, and of those folks, how many are conduct people? Okay. The gathered clan here. And do we have attorneys present? Okay. And how many of the attorneys are institutional counsel? Almost all. Okay. We've probably missed somebody. Any faculty? Other kind of higher ed types? Great. Okay. Well, we're going to sit down for most of this, but we'll try to stay on track. We'll leave time for some questions or comments at the end, and we're glad you're here.
Okay. I'm going to have to remember this little button. Okay, the first thing we wanted to do was review our learning outcomes, and you can see them up on there, but the first thing that we're going to discuss, it's not up there. Thank you. We're going to discuss the skill set or competencies that we've conducted some research over the years on that are, I guess, critical for student conduct officers. We're going to look at foundational assumptions and principles and the history that situates our practice.
Okay, then additionally, we want to discuss the purpose as well as the intention of practicing student conduct administration. The two are not necessarily the same. To consider what an integrated student affairs professional, especially with regard to conduct, would look like, and a little reflection upon the wisdom associated with good practice. So one question, if you have been in the field a while, you may know this, but another group of you may not be as familiar. Where did we come from? It's kind of important to understand your antecedents when you're talking about where you're headed. Most of the conduct concerns in American colleges and universities began with faculty. They were kind of the gatekeepers for everything that happened in the colonial colleges. Presidents had a role, faculty. As their work became more complicated, research universities emerged, it became important that we had someone designated to sort of watch over students, and the earliest of those would have been Harvard with a dean of men. And what did the dean of men know about student life, about student conduct? Well, not much. He was just the person that they thought would be closest to students. As things became more and more complicated, the dean of women, dean of men, dean of students model came out, and then eventually in the 70s, student affairs folks became very important, and conduct officers started to emerge as a profession along with student development theory. And those student conduct officers very quickly found themselves what has been termed the besieged clan, a group of folks who had to do some of what was perceived as the dirty work on campus and didn't really have a close association with other folks doing this, hence the formation of a professional organization eventually, the Association for Student Conduct Administration, then called ASJA. And since that time, we have moved our practice into an ever-evolving and developing round of practices beyond simply findings of responsibility or not. We've diversified our practice, so now we talk about alternative conduct resolution, things like mediation. We're concerned with wider issues like social justice on campus and amongst our students, and restorative justice. All of these are concepts that probably those first deans knew about intuitively but didn't have a title to lay it upon. So that's where we've been, but a good question is, well, who are we now?
So as Jim has indicated, we've really come from very micro type of orientation to a much larger profession. Student conduct has indeed become very specialized, and I would argue in student affairs very complex. The college campus is a microcosm of the greater society, so just think of all the ills in society, and hence you have what we deal with as far as complexity. The once isolated and sheltered ivory tower is now a place where we have active shooters, right? Cyber stalking, bullying, sexual assaults, psychological challenges, and all the things associated with those types of behaviors and incidents. We have a more diverse student population, more diverse faculty, more diverse staff. They're plugged in, right? And we're among this population where students present with increasing psychological and learning disabilities. The academy, as well as student conduct as a specialized profession, has and will continue to challenge us as administrators, as faculty, as staff, as students change and as we respond to what is happening in society. Our resilience is what makes, I think, our profession really, really interesting, but it's also what presents the challenges. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, do you want to drive for a minute? Sure. Thank you. You get it? Okay. So what does it mean to be a competent professional? And a lot of what we use are these buzzwords in higher education, such as benchmarking. So our profession is defined by different industry standards, right, and best practices. So things like, what does our job description say? And for many, they're very lengthy, those job descriptions. What does CAS say are our industry standards? What does ACPA and NASPA say as far as professional competency areas? There's a constant call for accountability through assessment efforts, a need to show that what we do is educational and that we have worth. And all of these things are based on and predicated upon the ability to benchmark.
So, this is more than just pushing paper and clearing your caseload, although there are probably times when it feels like that's all you do. We have a colleague at Appalachian who I bring in to talk to my students in college student development about what she does, how she helps students, which for a conduct officer may seem an odd notion. I'm helping students. And she says, well, I used to have this little list of procedures by my desk, and every time I had a student come in, I had to work through those procedures to make sure I hit all the points. And eventually the list of procedures went away because I became who I was. I knew what it was I was trying to do, and I knew what the questions were that were important to get satisfied for me as well as for the procedures before I let that student go. So some of the questions we want to consider in this reflection on what it is we're supposed to be about as conduct administrators. How does student conduct at your institution, where you work, contribute to student learning? We talk about student learning a lot. Faculty are driven to talk about student learning. Does your process involve stated expectations for student outcomes? What is it we're trying to accomplish? How are we doing that? How do you know students are in fact learning? And that's more than recidivism. If you only see a student one time, how do you know there's learning taking place? Do you regularly have a way to assess and to analyze the data on student learning that occurs? How frequently has your office or have you yourself conducted a self-assessment? Do you provide information from your department on the student learning that you facilitate? That is, what do people in your department and even beyond your department know about your real work? Most of them know students get in trouble, they come to you, and then students are either removed or they're sent back. What else do they know? So the bottom line here is, what's the purpose of your work? What's your philosophy? What's the philosophy of your department and your institution when talking about student conduct? So some things to consider about that might involve, again, who are we? What are the things that we need to know?
So we'd like for you to begin with a guided imagery of sorts, okay? And this is to kind of personalize what you perceive to be those things that are important to practice, okay? So imagine, if you would, and for some of you, you don't have to imagine, this is probably your position in the academy, but that you're a chief or senior student affairs officer, and you have a staff in which you've had one person handling student orientation, Greek life, and conduct. And all of a sudden it's become too cumbersome to handle all of these different things, and there's been some conflict of interests going on, so you decide to take and you create a position just for student conduct. So the first thing that we have to do in order to create that position is we have to take and develop a job description, right? So if you could just jot down, if you would, a couple characteristics and competencies that you would perceive to be important when you're hiring this very important position. So just a few minutes to take and write down, what would you be looking for as that senior student affairs officer? Okay, as you brainstorm with yourself, that list of competencies or characteristics that you would be looking for in this very specialized field of work, I'm sure that your list is probably quite extensive. So we'd be looking for a superhero of sorts, right?
You all were issued a cape when you took your job, right? Because that's essential.
Yeah. So the next thing that we'd like to do is we'd like to take and look a little bit more at the day-to-day work of that superhero.
And to do that, we distributed to you in your handouts for this session a case study. And it's called Superhero Sam, or Samantha, depending on the gender in the room. We'd like you to just look at that case study if you have it with you for a moment. Go over it. Notice the elements that are contained, what's going on. More importantly, what do you think the skills, the ability, the things, the tools you would need as a conduct officer? What would you expect that person to have? How would you describe that person in single words or short phrases? What are they doing? What do they need to be doing? What are the skills you're trying to assess if you're reviewing this case? So we'll give you a few minutes with the case to just sort of read through that. So as you're getting through the case and starting to make some notes, once your table is sort of at the same place in terms of having finished this assignment, just take a few moments at your table and see if you can determine 2 or 3 top superpowers, skills, competencies that you think Sam ought to have, and then we'll ask you to just pop those out very quickly for us. Okay, student development folks and student development faculty are especially accustomed to this. We have to make a judgment in group activities of when the group has moved beyond the assignment and into talking about travel and the weather and the beautiful leaves. So we think you're there. If we could, just very quickly, almost brainstorming, just from tables going around, toss out 2 or 3 things that you commonly believed superhero Sam possessed or needed to possess as superpowers, as competencies in order to do the work of this case. And we have a microphone here if we need it. This is Nicole, our higher ed student here.
So they needed knowledge in, Sam needed knowledge in what?
Speak up. Title IX. Very good. And we're out of the gate with legal issues. So what else does Sam need to know about legal issues? Yeah, so the softer skills of understanding victims, understanding students, understanding people, okay? Other things Sam needs?
Needs to know his resources on campus.
Very good. Sam needs to know about resources. He needs to be good at referring out when necessary. What else?
Sam needs to be a better communicator.
He needs to be a good communicator to start with, and in this case, he needs to be a better communicator. Yeah, okay. Fair enough. He's sounding okay, but not super yet. So what else does Sam need? Some of the back tables, there's a whole group of people sitting around Kim Novak who must have come up with stuff.
Sam needs to understand his capacity, what he has the talent, the skill, and professional responsibility to do, and not feel the need to step outside.
Self-knowledge, skills, abilities, who I am as a practitioner, what I can and can't do. Other skills Sam needs? The 2 o'clock quadrant of the room is awfully quiet. Anything over there? Yes.
Sam needs to understand the politics of his campus, as well as the chain of command. He failed to let his supervisor and dean students know about the situation.
Okay, so really 2 powers there. One is just being able to understand what politics is. The other important piece is what's the chain of command? You know, we don't like to talk about hierarchy and student development, but in fact it's very important. Other things?
So many of you are using the trickery that our students use. You're looking at your tablet so that we won't call on you.
Yes.
I think Sam needs a supervisor that said, hey, he's a huge person on your knee.
So he needs a supportive supervisor, environment, boundaries.
I think that anybody dealing with students needs to know that if there's an emergency, there's a recourse.
Right.
Just have a conversation.
You're not in this by yourself.
That's this skit.
Right. Thinking about a few more superpowers here, but this is based on some real incidents, so it can happen here as well as there. Other superpowers, other competencies. What's Sam missing? What's Sam need? It doesn't have to be that he's got it, but what does he need that he doesn't have? Doesn't have a magic touch with a woman who has the problem, the report, doesn't have a rapport with her. And that's not just knowing how to deal with people and victims, it's very one-to-one. Can you communicate with this person in front of you? Other things? Yes?
Initiative would have been handy rather than letting Melissa wait a month before she came in. The integrity to continue to do his job, the dependability, loyalty to the law itself, a sense of judgment and justice to carry this out, rather than waiting 6 months before it finally gets up in front of the board. On his act, courage, it looked like he was kind of hanging back, hoping it would go away, rather than taking it by the horns and pushing it forward.
Without putting words in your mouth. Without putting words in your mouth, you're not happy with Sam.
I think he's gutless.
Sam is gutless, so he needs fortitude, integrity.
It's a hotline to his institution's Office of General Counsel because he's supposedly
relationships, resources, legal counsel. Yeah.
Sam used to have, whenever Sam is a person of the opposite gender,
Thank you.
to discuss these with. Sam is a man, Sam is a woman, if Sam is a woman and is a man. I think that there's something about being able to get that person on the floor quickly into the office. It's very difficult to do.
So again, resources, colleagues, maybe, not always, but maybe there needs to be someone of the same gender in the picture, okay? At least an understanding of the gender issues so that you can respond appropriately by getting someone, yeah. So I'm not sensing a lot of sympathy for Sam here. Yes?
I think with the basics, Sam needs to know his policies, procedures, and practices. And he needs to know where there's been gaps with regard to his implementing the supervisor system, where there's been problems, and have they been addressed instead of letting it go on and on, which then invokes changes, which then invokes, of course, the challenges of changing policy, procedures, and practices at the institution of higher ed.
So foundational knowledge about policies, law, practices, best practices, and where we are or aren't in this process and what we need to then engage, okay? That's back to the Title IX comment as well, that lots happening out there, so he needs to be up to date on what's going on in the world of policy. Anybody else want to savage Sam further? Sam needs a prescience as a superpower to know what's going to happen in the future. Good luck, Sam. And in the back?
I am sympathetic for Sam because he's a new professional in this field. He needs strong supervision. I mean, what he lacks here is knowledge base, experience. He shouldn't be left to flounder in this situation. So it's not just that he definitely has to take responsibility for his actions as a professional, but there's a structural issue here. There's a supervisory issue here.
Right.
Where this young professional should not be out there.
Young professional shouldn't be hanging out there by himself. He's young, needs to have experience. Now, imagine Sam is a young professional and a single operator in a conduct office, which is not impossible in some colleges or universities. So what's his support network? What's his supervisory network? How do we get Sam assistance? Or, for that matter, imagine Sam is much more experienced, but he or she is living in a changing environment, a rapidly changing environment, and again, is a solo act. Doesn't have on-campus resources, maybe needs collegial resources, some of you folks. Other insights about Sam? Nobody has said Sam needs a different job yet. That's probably good. Okay, well, that's a good list of things. Now, we have actually our own listing, our own illustration of the kinds of things Sam really needs to get off of dead center and be a more competent professional.
Okay, so 20 years ago, in 1993, I was lucky enough to do some research with Steve Janosic at Virginia Tech. And what we were trying to do was we did an extensive review of the literature, and we wanted to take and identify what we perceived to be the critical competencies of student conduct practice. And back then we called it judicial affairs work. So like I said, we did this extensive review of the literature, and we simply asked those people that should be supporting SAM, those chief student affairs officers back then, what they perceived, and we did a national survey, what they perceived to be the critical competencies of practice. So if they were hiring a student conduct administrator, what would that person look like? What would they need? From that, we identified a list of competencies, and again, back then it was judicial affairs officers. Incidentally, we used back then a pen and pencil or a pen and paper survey via the mail, and people actually returned them. But we took and we extrapolated the 10 critical competencies, and from that, in 1997, we used that as the basic curriculum for the Gearing Institute, and that's how everything with the competency model began. In 2001, we again conducted another survey to see whether or not the competencies were on target, and they changed very little, but this time who we surveyed were actual frontline conduct administrators. So we wanted to see whether or not the chief people were in agreement with what the actual people that did the work reported as the basic competencies. Then again, last year in 2012, the competencies were revisited, and it's striking to me that the basic content areas over time have really remained strikingly the same. The only thing that has really changed has been an emphasis on assessment and research, so showing our worth. Now, when administrators were asked to reveal what they believed to be the most pressing issues, and this was in an open-ended type of pattern of a response, what they indicated was mental health and threat assessment practices, sexual assault and misconduct, compliance with state and federal mandates, restorative justice, and conflict resolution. So many of the things, and we've put this in a little model, that's the superhero. The arrows coming in are kind of the pressing institutional pressures that everybody is confronted with, whether it be parents, energetic parents is what we like to call them, right? Trustees, all of the demands in your day-to-day work where you have a high-profile case, and then all of a sudden, everybody wants to have some say in it. And what Sam is holding up are the competencies to date. So knowledge of a code of conduct, policies, practices, laws, policies, and mandates, forums of resolution. We have many that are alternative types of forums nowadays, right? Student development and multiculturalism, and I think we can kind of wind into that a knowledge of victims, assistance, sexual assault practices, governance and relationship building. You were very astutely pointed that out, the being proactive with that and knowing that we have to build incredible relationships. Ethics, integrity, and decision making. For young professionals, this is something that sometimes can't be taught. It's more, it's what you value, but also as you get more experience, you become more comfortable with making sound decisions. Administration, just the day-to-day, how do you keep up with the paperwork and reporting practices, and then again, assessment. So therefore, there's few areas in student affairs that demand such an extensive skill set.
So the session we were first asked to do had to do with sort of tips for conducting student conduct practice more wisely. And we looked at a lot of things. We looked at former ASJA, SCA materials. We looked at some writings from our field by some colleagues we respect. And we brainstormed a long list of tips, some of which we've chosen to share with you this morning because we think they were the most significant amongst the longer list. And probably you can add to this list as well. They're broken into two groups, actually. The first part is procedural markers. A lot of you talked in looking at Sam's case about things that were procedural in nature, the harder side, the hard skills, we would call that in our outdoor program. So here are some of the things you need to know and react to as a conduct practitioner. The first one is that having a decision overturned on appeal, whether that's in-house, out-of-house, hopefully not in court, but it does happen. Having a decision overturned on appeal is not the end of the world, and it's not a sign that you're ineffective. It's a sign that you got overturned on appeal. Now, conversely, it can be quite serious, depending on the basis for that, or it can be minor. The second thing is, my apologies to the attorneys in the room, don't let the law and attorneys intimidate you. I'm fond of telling my second-year students and the first-year students in my ethical legal class to repeat after me, "You will be sued." And they say, "You will be sued." And I said, "No, no, no, I will be sued. I've already been sued, now it's you that's going to be sued." And it's not just a cute joke, it's designed for them to think through that and get past it. You will be sued, even if you do everything right. So don't be intimidated by that notion, but at the same time, everybody's going to threaten you with it. So get used to it. Get used to the fact that everybody's got an attorney in the family, and have a relationship with your own counsel. You know, and you can invite their counsel to talk to your counsel, and meanwhile, let's see if we can resolve the difficulty here. So desensitize yourself to that. Don't assume that your supervisor or other superiors have knowledge or understanding of the technicalities of your job. They may, but they may not. Take time to educate them and the broader community about what it is you do, why you do it, the basis on which you do it, and you'll find you can be a very powerful voice in the room.
Can I interject there? A couple people really keyed in on Sam's inexperience and the importance of having support, and I felt some empathy in the room for that. And I really do think that this is a really critical area that I think a lot of young professionals assume that they will find themselves in a position where they'll have a very supportive environment, and that they, even though they have expertise in this functional area, they'll be able to depend on other folks to help them to kind of navigate very muddy waters. And I don't think that that happens all of the time. We are hearing that from our students. So this, I think, is a really important thing to help young professionals understand that we can't really assume, right? Because it is such a complex area that others in student affairs will have that knowledge. So therefore, the burden really is put on a young professional many times to become that expert in the area and to maybe bring others up to speed with the changing legislation and the changing demographics and so forth and so on.
I'm going to ask Daisy to flip back to the last slide for just a second, because it's the place I really want to talk about it for a moment. This quotation means a lot if you're a student conduct practitioner, or it should. This wisdom, mature integration of appropriate knowledge, a seasoned ability to filter the inessential from the essential. I do tell my students occasionally, you might at some points be the smartest person in the room about the narrow field of what you're talking about. So don't be intimidated. Also, don't be afraid to know what you don't know. So this wisdom notion is very important in this whole sense of what you know and what you don't. And then back to our tips again. Study campus politics. Somebody mentioned politics as one of the skills he needs. Well, study campus politics. What's the governance structure? What's the informal structure? Here's the chart that says who's in charge. Now, who has real influence and power? Who can you use and utilize, and who can help you in a real crisis rather than just what the org chart says? Know who your potential champions on campus are. And that's a part of understanding who your allies are, who the people who may not be allies are, and developing those relationships far in advance of when you actually have to have them. An important one is to admit your mistakes. Learn from them, move on. I mentioned in yesterday's session, we got lost for 2 hours trying to get back from Canada up here. I'm having a little trouble with admitting that mistake, but the fact is we just missed the exit. You know, sometimes in your practice you're going to miss the right exit ramp or the right entry ramp. And it's important to acknowledge that, figure out what you learned from that, and then move forward. It's the same advice we give to our students. Make meaning of it, process it, move forward. Remember that student conduct is a process. It's not simply a product of deciding right and wrong, of reading the regulations. It's a process, and sometimes the process is slow and arduous, and sometimes the outcomes are difficult to judge at first. But you get there. It's a process. Student involvement in the process is critical to success, and this is a particularly troubling one philosophically right now. We're looking at directives from our government that say in certain kinds of adjudications, students probably shouldn't be the deciders. That goes against a lot of philosophy that we've developed in student development and student conduct over the years. I don't know how that's going to resolve, but remember that student involvement at some points in all processes, writing the code, sometimes adjudication, sometimes decision-making, is important. Those are the people that we are working for many of the days. All cases are important. Not all cases are going to get you sued, aren't going to send you to court, aren't going to get you a dear colleague letter or not so dear colleague letter. But they're all important, even the minor ones. And the problem in our profession is we don't know sometimes which cases are going to become very important, or for the particular student or students, which ones are absolutely critical to their survival. So if we start with the notion all cases are important, we know that what might appear to be petty eventually may erupt into something much larger. From my standpoint, the last one, and I think a critical one, is this notion that integrity and ethics are central. We have to ensure that our behavior as conduct officers in and out of the office, the conduct of our office, the environment that we set, the expectations that we put out for people are matched by our own ethical standards, our own learning, our own development as a professional. And whether we like it or not, we are expected to model what it is that we are practicing, what we are teaching to our students. And it's awfully difficult to avoid duplicity completely in life. But for a conduct officer, it's a pretty important standard to go by. And then we move from those into what we think of more as personal markers.
Those personal markers, I think at times we can almost put these aside because we're so involved in kind of getting to the end of the pile of paper, and we start to adjudicate things for the sake of adjudicating them because we have to make sure that our cases are resolved by the end of the semester.
Or we're pushed into it sometimes by our supervisor or by our structure.
Mm-hmm. So as personally, I think that the first is, and this really was brought out in the scenario, relation building is essential to success. And a lot of times we're going to feel as if we're out there alone. We're the only ones that really understand this very specialized niche of work. Maybe our supervisor isn't up to speed as far as all of the technicalities associated with our work, and we feel besieged, that besieged clan notion that ASJA identified many, many years ago. We feel alone, all right, and we feel as if there's no one to turn to. So relation building and finding a good mentor is really, really essential to success. The next is believing in yourself and trying not to internalize what is said. And I know that for a lot of young professionals, this is a really developmentally a really hard thing to come to terms with. The position that you take on campus many times is not a popular type of position. People in the position are seldomly liked, right? And everyone has that need of affirmation from other human beings. So it's a really, again, lonely and sometimes desperate place to be in. Learn something new every day. Again, we're perceived to be the experts in the field, so we need to become learners in the process, whether it be through people or just knowledge, right, coming to things like this. And then imparting our learning and sharing our learning among other people in the academy is very, very important. Remembering that each student is unique. Every student comes through the door with a different story. They've had different experiences just like you and I have experiences. And I think many times, again, we're so pressed to get things done. We only have a half hour, right, to meet with a student. Maybe 45 minutes is a luxury. And sometimes we can forget that they're a living, breathing, feeling human being. with their own uniqueness. And their whole story might be different than ours. Student conduct is not a game, and what we mean by that is that we win some and we lose some, but we can win by just having a dialogue with a student. It doesn't necessarily have to be a zero-sum game. We need, and this is from a friend of ours, Gary Pavella, used to say, help students to behold themselves. In other words, we're part of the educational process, and I would argue in many times much more powerful than what is happening in the classroom. So how can we help these young individuals, many times 18 to 24-year-olds, behold themselves and discover who they really are and their greatest potentials? Try never to let a student leave your office angry, and I think this is based on a good relationship as well, right? And be able to sit and be patient with a student, even if they're being a little irrational, and just keep in mind that it might be a maturation problem more than anything.
And I want to just paraphrase credit for that practitioner of my acquaintance, Sally Cole, who's been long retired, used to say to people when she worked at Stanford as a judicial officer that her goal in most of the conduct settings, beyond just getting through the policy and process, was to have the student laugh at least once or smile at least once before they left the office. And what she was really saying was, I want to be sure the student's okay, that they're in the right place, that I've not wrecked this student's life. And I think that's a really important judgment to keep in mind.
The next is taking good care of self. It's a very stressful, right, functional area, and we can't be good to other people unless we're good to ourselves. So don't let the stress manage you, but rather do what you need to do to take care of yourself and manage your own stress.
And I have to chime in on that one as well. Because we teach graduate students and student development for 2 years as cohorts, one of the consistent things we hear from them all the time is they're so busy, they're so busy, they're so busy. Well, we talk about self-care. And then inevitably, one or two of them will say, you know, when I get finished with grad school, everything will be so much easier. Yeah. So it's a problem we're trying to get them to address before they get out there, where things really aren't easier. They get more and more complicated. And so even if you do this religiously, you need to be reminded on bad weeks when there's a really terrible thing going on in your office, you still have to make time to take care of yourself, or you can't take care of others.
Related to that is cling to those kudos and those words of thanks. I know that we don't get many of them, right? But I'm hoping that everybody has a little drawer, maybe a very little drawer, where one student might have either written you a note or came back and said, you know, hey, thanks. You're the first one that's ever held me accountable, and I attribute my success to that. Hang on to those moments.
I call that the rainy day file. When things are really terrible, that's the folder you pull out and remind yourself why you're doing this work, and also that you can be a success in this work, even at the points you don't feel like you're being very successful.
And the last is experience is the greatest teacher, and as Jim has mentioned, that is where wisdom comes from.
I want to read a brief thing that I wrote a couple of years ago, and it struck me as we were doing the session. It's about wisdom. It says, wisdom is more than discriminating good from evil. It's more than simply anticipating consequences. Wisdom is intentionally choosing our path, making decisions based on what we intuitively know, as well as what rules, policies, and facts tell us about any situation. It's what separates an excellent practitioner from the mechanistic processing of a computer. Computers hold a lot of data in their memories. They can make highly accurate calculations based on pre-established routines. Computers are excellent at following the rules, but computers are not yet wise. They don't exhibit intuition, they don't make meaning, and they don't have much intention, other than to frustrate us usually. We should strive not for the accuracy of computers, but for the wisdom of humanity. So we were trying to kind of encapsulate all of this, and we had a couple of our tips that we thought sort of summed up the whole nature of the thing. Years ago, and you'll know how many years ago it was because we were still publishing yearbooks, a student editor of a yearbook was just curmudgeonly. She couldn't get along with anyone, she couldn't follow processes, it was her way or the highway, and she was difficult, just as a student. Didn't really get into trouble, but really caused a lot of grief. When she published her yearbook, she was the student yearbook editor, the last page of the yearbook had a picture of her walking across a snowy hill, by herself, of course. But what she put as a caption really captured my sense of who she was, and it helped me understand at least what her philosophy had been through the whole thing. It wasn't just, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. She had a personal sense of who she was. And the catchphrase that I've since carried with me, and I even looked up attribution, it's been around far beyond this student, and it's very simple, probably good wisdom for Vermont. Some days you get the bears. Some days the bears get you. What you have to accept is you can't save the world, you can't always be right, and you're going to lose as many as you win, if we think of it in those gaming terms. But just repeat to yourself, next time there's trouble. Some days you get the bears, some days the bears get you.
And if the corollary becomes that you've lost faith and that you perceive yourself as ineffective and lacking passion, then we would, I guess, recommend that you have the courage to walk away, because we really owe that to our students.
I used to tell people if the world were a really just place, a fair place, there are two occupations we would pay highly and continuously. The first one is kindergarten teachers, because you turn your kids loose to these people who are going to be formative, and we don't pay them anything. And the second category was people in student development, and especially student conduct people, who again, we're turning our students loose to at the time they're most vulnerable in their developing lives, and trusting that these people are going to help them learn how to do the right things, how to live a full life.
So now we want to just open it up to questions and comments.
And we have a microphone here if someone wants to say something. It's hard to believe in a room this size there's not a lot of attributable wisdom.
I guess one question for you would be, day to day, do you feel that you're very intentional about your work?
And kind of a corollary to that question would be, these are tips about wisdom, but what gets in your way of practicing wisdom, in your view? Yes, ma'am.
Be brave.
I think there's a lot of fear of litigation.
Yes.
And so where I work, you see an overly deferential treatment of students, even when the student has absolutely no grounding for what they're alleging or what they want you to do or what their expectations are of how they should be treated or catered to. And when you try to advocate and say, listen, you know, the law is on our side, there's precedence for this, we don't have to do this, and there's just this fear of, you know, we don't want this to go to the lawyers, let's just, you know, let the student have what they want, and it's just very frustrating. It's disheartening, and it's very easy just to kind of, you know, say, okay, whatever, I know how this is going to go, so what's the use of me even trying to say what the position should be on this issue?
Well, we've got a couple of university councils in the room. I'd be interested in having a university council sort of respond to that fear. What do you tell your campus clients? Is there one that's willing to talk to that? Not so much.
Well, I'm not a university council, but what I do if I'm in a situation, if I'm in a situation where, I mean, I've gotten the letters from lawyers many times, so the apprehension is not there, but what I will do prior to making a decision where I feel I may get one of those letters is I'll meet with my counsel prior to let them know this, just to apprise them of the situation, and this is what we're thinking about doing, just to get, someone who is of that mindset, what they think is our decision, one that can be defensed, just what their thoughts are. I'll do that prior to. Not that it will guide my decision. And he'll, I have a really good relationship with our counsel, so he'll even tell me, I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just, he'll communicate that with me also. But I'll meet with him prior to, just to get their thoughts before I make a decision, and just use that information to, it may change my mind and it may not. But as you said before, everybody has a lawyer, heard it all before. There's not much that can really be done about that, as far as my experience.
The wise counsels I've worked with have always started the conversation by saying, I'm not here to make the decision for you. And the second corollary was, but you have to ask me the right questions, because if you ask me what I need to do, then I'll respond to that. But if you ask me for guidance, I'll respond to that. Other fears, things that get in your way? Yes, ma'am, in the back. She's coming back to you, but maybe you can shout, I don't know.
I think sometimes when you are meeting with students day in and day out, and you have many students on your calendar, I think I fear sometimes that the emotions are going to get in the way, and I try really hard to stay focused on what our philosophy is and what I'm here for, and what the student, why the student is coming to me. But I try, and I think the piece that kind of keeps me grounded is a sense of humor. But I do find that emotion, like you never want to lose that control, like when they're trying to push your buttons, or but I do have to say that I kind of keep it in perspective with humor. But that's my fear too, that one day I'm going to be like, okay, that's enough, because you can only take so much, kind of. But in the end, at the end of the day, there is that educational moment that you have with these students that makes all the difference, and it kind of brings you back. But it's emotions too, I think, that theirs or yours that might come into play with not being so objective. But
Yes, I think there's a certain amount of temperance, if you would, to becoming an effective administrator. And the counselors I don't know if there's any mental health professionals in the audience, but I think they've written about that really well when they identify transference type of issues. And I don't think that conduct administrators are in any way immune to that. Whether it be feeling sadness for a student or just thinking that something is incredibly funny. I can remember one time sitting in front of a student who he drank too much, and his roommate had shaved off one of his eyebrows. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm really trying hard not to laugh at this, but I found it to be incredibly funny. Not him and his circumstance, because he was very upset that had happened, but we're only human. And I think it becomes a problem when we don't recognize that we are relating as humans. So to have a sense of empathy, sadness, to feel that something is very funny, I think that's only human.
Yeah, and having that sort of self-care. I used to say to my administrative assistant when I was a conduct officer, my children around the dinner table one night when they were younger said, "What do you do, Dad?" And I was at the point you're describing. I said, I meet. That's all I do. I meet all day. Every 15, 20, 30 minutes I meet. So I used to tell my administrative assistant around 12:30, so I'm going to the gym now before I actually hurt somebody later in the day. And I didn't mean I was physically going to hurt somebody. We worry about that these days more than we did then. I meant I just need to get back to who I am and work out a little of the stress and be able to laugh at myself a little bit. So you got to have some routine that works for you.
Yeah.
Other boundaries, limitations? Yes, sir.
I find that every conduct issue is on a sliding spectrum for mental illness. Quite often.
Yeah. We talk a lot with our students about that old normal bell curve. And it's kind of important to try to figure out in this situation, where am I on that curve? Where's the student on that curve? And how close am I sliding to something that's really an outlier? Yeah. And that's dangerous. It's very difficult to figure out, but it's a critical competency. And you get that through experience and practice.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I don't know the gentleman's name that pointed to relationships early on here. And, you know, getting to know the counseling center and being able to walk students over there if you need to is just incredibly important nowadays. How many people follow the study conducted by counseling center directors every year where they report on statistics? Raise of hands. I just think that if you don't, you might want to look to that, because there has been a steady increase in those that are reporting severe psychological illnesses, as well as those students who come to us with medications. So yeah, it's a changing demographic that's quite startling, and a lot of times presents itself, unfortunately, in student conduct issues.
Does anyone here work on a campus that doesn't have something like a behavioral intervention team? No?
Anyone else?
Almost every campus now is going to have a behavioral intervention team, and it's a group of professionals, counselors, student development people, and they're tracking. They're looking for those students who might be more than just troubled. At our campus, we've got 3 different levels of it. So we've got faculty on the first level inputting from classroom observations, we've got student development staff inputting and conduct staff, and then we've got the real threat assessment group. But the commonality of all those is an intelligent pair of eyes making a judgment and inputting the data at the first point, and then deciding if that data is really meaningful or not. So it is troubling, it's difficult, it's dangerous, it's fraught with liability, which is the very thing we're trying to reduce, but it's an essential function of conduct officers to try to read that. Other comments, limitations, boundaries, wisdom?
I appreciate that you brought up the campus politics, and I'm intrigued that by your choice of the words to use the word study campus politics, and would love to just hear more of your recommendations with navigating that.
When I was still in practice, before I came to the dark side, I devised something I call the mouse organizational chart. And it started with a very simple question. You see a mouse in your residence hall, what do you do? And the obvious answer was, well, they report it, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And then the next thing was, okay, you see the mouse again in a week, what do you do? And the assumption is, nobody did anything. And so I'm going to start back through it, except this time I'm going to engage the media or my parents, or I'm going to call the president or the chancellor's office, like I'm really going to get them, but I'm going to call them. And still nothing happens, and so you go out to the media and the television networks and whatnot. It's kind of understanding how things do and don't work, and it's partially starting from the viewpoint that not everything that happens despite our organizational charts is a rational occurrence. Things happen in channels, they happen because people are or aren't paying attention, they happen because some people have more power, authority, interest, engagement than others. But studying this dynamic on your campus, who really has the power? Look at the org chart, fine. Now talk about who really has the influence. If you're in student development, for example, if your vice president's been there 15 years, which would be unusual these days, well, do they really know stuff, know where the bodies are buried, know where the skeletons are, that other people no longer understand? If you get a new vice president, if you get a new president of the university, what do they and don't they know organizationally about how things have functioned? So just that kind of wisdom of understanding how things work and testing it with more experienced colleagues. That's back to Daisy's point about the mentoring.
Jim had also mentioned champions. I think it's really important to surround ourselves with those people that can advocate for conduct issues, as well as things like issues like academic integrity. So who are those faculty that really have advanced service learning, academic integrity, those types of things, and those are the champions that can help you to promote your own functional unit.
Yeah. Knowing your police chief before you need them, knowing your risk management officer before you need them, your counsel, and then who are your allies. Yeah. As we're winding up, our helpful student Nicole in the back is signaling we're just about done. I do want to thank Nicole from the higher ed program here. She's been sort of shepherding the mic and keeping us as much as possible on track. And we want to thank all of you for your time. We always take things away from these sessions that we add on and learn a lot from our colleagues. So you've been a good crowd. Kim.
I think you all should know that if you want to know more about
Yeah.
as a team, but there's also this really fantastic orange book that I'm so old I have dog ears that I know Jim, you contributed to.
Yep.
And I know Daisy, you had to inform that. So they don't
Yeah.
tell you that, but they're wonderful authors, and I would suggest if you're not a conduct officer, to buy that as a gift for your conduct officer. So thank you for what you do. for the community.
And we don't make any money off of that, but we're happy you mentioned it, and we'll pay you later.
Yeah.
One is called Student Conduct, the Complete Guide to Professional Practice, I think?
Yes.
Yeah.
And this was just published on the anniversary of ASCA, and it's the state of student conduct, and it's revisited, and it has a nice history, and it does go through the competencies and a look into the future of our work. And ASCA is going to put this online for free. So, and this is contributions of all of the people in the field. Jim and I just brought them together as editors. So.
And another one that's harder to find is another compilation called Exercising Power with Wisdom, and it's a number of ASCA. In fact, ASCA sponsored the book, so there are a number of people from conduct in there as well.
Again, thank you for being here.